why the left hates the Old Testament. One notices pretty rapidly that as much as atheists rail against religion and belief and those who believe, their greatest invective is saved for the Old Testament. And unfortunately, this often percolates over into hatred for Jews. But it's a strange phenomenon to be talking to atheists and to be railed against because of the Jewish scriptures. Now, to be fair, it is true that the Old Testament is found in the Bible with the New Testament, but it's also pretty clear to anyone that wants to see or understand that the Old Testament is the Jewish scripture, and this is the covenant between the Jews and God. And so if in the pre-Christian era the Jews were God's chosen people, it's not going to be likely that those who aren't Jews are going to read the Bible as a testament to how much God is favoring the Gentiles or the pagans. But what the key facts that we need to appreciate is, one, that the Old Testament is a book of history. It records the history of the Jews, and specifically the history of God's covenant with the Jews and how it played out on the earth. But there's a rationale behind this that we need to understand. The Jews are God's chosen people as an example. They're not the chosen people as a people set apart because of their merit. They didn't earn the status of God's chosen people. This was something that was handed to them for a specific reason, and that reason was so that they could be a lesson to us, an example of us. And this is seen in several verses of the Bible. Most of them are fairly long. We have Jude chapter 1 verse 5 to the end, to verse 25, end of chapter 1. And in James 5 verse 10 and 11 we read, "Take, my brethren, the prophets, who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is pitiful and of tender mercy." Job was an example of suffering. This is not a man who earned great mercy and who earned great status. He was chosen to demonstrate how man can endure with faith. A very important set of verses is Hebrews 8:1 to 10:39, and this goes into God setting an example for us of the Israelites, and how the Egypt didn't keep the covenant that they had been given. Look in verse 8, chapter 8, verse 8. For finding fault with them, he saith, Behold, the days have come, saith the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because I continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not, saith the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind, and write them in their hearts, and I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their iniquities will I remember no more. In that he saith, A new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. And we also see in Hebrews 4, verse 7 to 11. Again, he limiteth a certain day, saying in David, Today, after so long a time, as it is said, Today, if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts. For if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not afterwards have spoken of another day? There remaineth therefore a rest to the people of God. For he that is entered into his rest, he also hath ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor therefore to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. And in 1 Corinthians 10:1 to 24. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and all did drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye adulterers, as for some of them. As it is written, The people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happen unto them for examples, and were written for our admonition. Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, Flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge ye what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we being many are one bread and one body, for we are all partakers of that one bread. Behold Israel, after the flesh. Are not they which eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? So what we have to remember and appreciate is that the Jews were provided us as an example to us. And this isn't just a general example, but a very specific and target example. We know they were given the law, and the law is divine and perfect. But we also know the Jews never did follow the law, and they couldn't follow the law. And when they were saved, it was saved by faith, because they weren't following the law. They weren't being redeemed through the performance of works. It was a redemption through their attempt to be redeemed, because they believed that God would redeem them through the effort, through the trial of their redemption. And what this tells us is that the law doesn't save, which the Bible reiterates so many times. The best that the law can do is put us in a position of normalcy, because the basic status we should be in is people who follow the law, that is, do good. But from when we were born, we begin to do wrong. And so the most that we could do is to do right. We can't do right plus. So we can never repay the debt that we owe in the sin that we commit. And for this we need someone to pay the debt. So the law can't save. We can't follow the law. We can't follow the traffic law, never mind the divine law. But the Jews were given the divine law to follow. And what is hard for the atheist to accept is that this divine law didn't apply to those outside of the law. It applied to the Jews. The Jews were a chosen people to prove a point that God was making, that the law can't save. And to do this, clearly, to be an example to us, he had to show that the people of Israel, no matter what the promise was, and no matter what the reward was, they couldn't live up to the needs of the law. And for all of their sacrifices and burnt offerings, they couldn't wash away the sin that was continuously being accumulated. What irks the atheist, though, is that they're not Jews, and so they were never involved in this covenant. And this is only repeated with Christianity, because they're also excluded from the blessings of Christianity. So when we see the Jews being blessed and rewarded and protected, it's seeing them as the good guy and the pagans as the bad. And when they're being punished for what they failed to do, not what they did so much to pagans. And so the atheist keeps saying, well, here we have a people who have gotten away with so much. They're being favorited by God, and this is so unfair, and we don't like this because we're identifying with the pagans, with the people who don't believe. Well, okay, that's fine and good, but you can't reject um, a offer or a situation or a gift and then expect to get the gift. And you can't expect those who are being gifted and rewarded and chosen to not be treated in a special way. If we're doing an experiment to test the efficacy of a drug, there's a group that gets a drug and a group that doesn't. Well, if the group that's not getting the drug dies because they're not getting the drug, that's unfortunate. But you can't have a test without having a control group and a test group. And the control group are going to get the consequences that they are expected or looked for to get because they're not in the test group. And the Jews were the test group and the pagans the control group. And that's for our edification and for them to be set an example for us so that we can learn from them. And it's unfortunate that atheists can't look at the Jews as an example and to see that they are now the Jews in the sense that they are the ones living under the law, but the law can't save, and so that covenant, that test has been abandoned. We moved on to a test of faith, to the test of belief, and the law has now been abandoned as a viable possibility. And now the atheists have become part of the control group, living or trying to live by the law and trying to be justified by the law. But they can neither be justified by the law or saved by the law. And they can't live by the law. So they still haven't grasped the situation, and perhaps now they're saying, well, we're living by the law, or trying to, so why aren't we being blessed? But you don't get blessed by living by the law, and that's the whole point of what the Jews were an example of, and it's what the atheists can't comprehend, that the Jews weren't being saved by the law, and all these things that they were undergoing and causing to be undergone by their neighbors was all an example and a demonstration to show that people can't save themselves. They can't create the laws, they can't create the means by which they're going to justify themselves. And by saying that they know, atheists know good and bad and can do what is good, is beside the point. It's immaterial because it doesn't save you. But let's say there was a perfect law and the atheist could follow this perfect law, but that only makes them legalist. If something is written down and this writing down is perfect and you follow this perfect set of instructions, that doesn't make you moral. It just makes you a legalist. And that you can follow a recipe doesn't make you a great master chef. The master chef is able to make his own determinations at each step of the process. And so once more, the atheists have missed the lesson. They've missed the teaching. Even if you're following the law, even if you're justifying yourself by following your own strictures and your own doctrines and your own guidelines. It doesn't make you saved. It doesn't make you ethical. It only makes you a legalist. And so without Christ, without the sacrifice of Christ, the gift of Christ, we can't be saved. There's no if, buts, or maybes about it. It's just not possible, and this is the lesson that atheists haven't seemed to be able to grasp. And they're griping at the very source of where their wisdom could come from, the lessons taught to us by Israel in their attempts to do what the atheists are still trying to do. Be saved by laws, be saved by precepts, be saved by procedures and guidelines. It can't happen because we can't follow them, and if we could, it would only make us into computers or robots or, as I say, legalists. And that's the situation. You can hate the Israelites, you can hate the Old Testament, but you should be appreciating the lessons it's teaching us, because these lessons point us to the only route to salvation, and that's Christ. Praise his holy name.